All right, friends, today we're going to be talking about Saturn in the sign of Pisces for the last time, as Saturn has reached that 29-degree point, and this will be the final time that Saturn's going to ingress into Aries and continue its journey until it's out of there. And this 29-degree mark is super important. It's a critical degree. We're talking about moving from a water sign into a fire sign. This critical degree is called the Gandanta point, which is also considered a karmic knot. And considering how long Saturn stays in a sign, it's really worth looking at it. But in terms of a point of reflection, I want to take this moment for us to look back to see what Saturn has been teaching us since March of 2023. That's almost 3 years now. That is enough time for our mind, our body, and our spirit to get conditioned to actually become a different kind of a person. And we have this feeling often that on Monday, on the first of the month, on the first of the year, or when Saturn goes into a new sign, we can close a chapter and we can just start another one. But if you've lived long enough, you know that your story carries you. Wherever you go, there you are. There are no new beginnings, no new chapters. Our narrative is always with us. And the only thing that has the power and the capacity to change it is in our ability to sit, to self-reflect, to take an inventory, to be reflexive, to see what lessons we learned, how we reacted, how we acted. Those are the things that can change the trajectory of where we're going, so we don't have to constantly repeat where we've been. And there's a moment of truth awaiting us, and that's because of what Saturn was doing in Pisces. One of the common things that occurred in a lot of people's lives was a sense of disconnection. And that's because Saturn was dissolving things. It was dissolving our connections, the structures that were upholding us in our lives. And considering where Saturn's going to go now, Saturn was trying to create a distinction between what is powerful, what is strong, and what is weak. And we're going to see that in the sign of Aries. And one way to notice that is that when Saturn was dissolving everything, when we felt isolated, when we felt disconnected, like a freaking solitary animal a lot of times, because you were being separated from the herd that you belonged to, did you just blindly go out there and look for another herd to have validation, to have a sense of belonging? Or were you comfortable with being alone, that solitary animal that can withstand the dark, their own solitude, their own thoughts? Were you able to face your own lacks, gaps, shortcomings? That's what's going to separate the strong from the weak. Those people who were constantly looking for a herd, they're going to find themselves among predatory leaders. And those of you who were able to stand on your own, once when we get into the sign of Aries, you'll see that you can lead your own life with a lot of strength, being resolute, being decisive, even though Saturn's going to be debilitated in that sign. Because you will know how to pause, how not to act, how to let an action be your action when that's necessary. And this is what we need to kind of sit back right now and reflect on. What do we learn? Who did we become? And where is that taking us now? We need to move forward with some sense of clarity. We need to fully understand what's changed within us now, how our lives have changed forever. Saturn has a tendency to do that. When it stays somewhere for about 2.5 years, it restructures that aspect of life. And look at the house where Saturn's sitting in. That's where Saturn's dissolving project was happening. The themes of that house, the people pertaining to that house. If you look back, we don't occupy that space in the same way anymore. Things have shifted. And they were subtle, but they've accumulated to a lot because Saturn is slow. And in this past 2.5 years, coming to almost 3 years, we were asked to put some things down, bring it into the sacrificial altar to be dissolved. And there were other things that were so heavy that we had to carry on our back. And all of it has had consequences. So that's what we need to understand in this moment. And there's another thing worth remembering. Saturn is slow. Saturn is boring. One of the things that it did, it created a lot of redundancy and repetition. And that is actually a perfect ingredient for people to lose their sense of meaning, especially if a person is not capable of sitting in their own silence to engage meaningfully with life's repetitive components. It feels like you're moving, but you're just moving in a tight little circle, not going anywhere. And we need to understand what the meaning of that was. This is kind of like the image of Sisyphus carrying that boulder, the world, on its back, keep going up a mountain. And then by the end of the day, it's like back at the bottom of the mountain, and then you got to carry the same thing up forward. That story is telling us something about crisis of meaning. And if you think about it, so much of life is about that, or routines or everyday responsibilities. They are so redundant and boring that we have to consciously give it meaning. And the past 2.5 years, because we had to carry so much weight that we didn't even want to, it might have created crisis of meaning for a lot of people. Your sense of purpose might have been distorted with this process. It brought a lot of uncertainty. When we don't have meaning, we become uncertain in life. We don't know where we're going. We don't understand why we do what we do. But there was a beauty in this too, because of the things that we had to redundantly carry forward. We also came to realize how so many things that we do carry and have been carrying are unnecessary, and we're actually allowed to put that weight down. So for many of us, we came to realize that we don't have to fulfill certain expectations. They're not even our own expectations. We don't have to be attached to certain people. A lot of our attachment and connections loosened and got destroyed in this past 2.5 years. Like some roles that we were engaged in, we're just performing these roles day in and day out. Well, it was like sucking all of our life, draining it right out of us. We got to see it. We relinquished it. Saturn destroyed it. That's what Saturn's symbolizing here. And if you haven't had time to reflect, this is why this next 2 weeks is important. Some of us have not reflected on the things that we let go, or we were forced to let go, or things that walked away from us. So we experience these things as losses, as betrayal. And of course, the way Saturn did this, again, is slowly. It wasn't sudden, it was gradual. That's why it also needs reflection, so that we understand how things accumulated, what the outcomes were. And specifically in this video, I want to help us understand what this sustained effort was about, what it was shaping over time, to see what was building internally, even when outward progress wasn't that obvious. And most importantly, why this period mattered, especially as Saturn prepares to now move into Aries and what lays ahead. And before getting into the depth of this video, there'll be plenty more videos coming out about Saturn. Saturn's ingress into the sign of Aries will be the first one. And if you want to catch those videos, please remember to subscribe so YouTube sends you a notification. Now let's get to the heart of what this 2.5 years were about, and where it is that we're heading, and what lessons we can take forward into the sign of Aries. And before getting into the core of this video, I want to paint you a picture of Saturn so we get a feel for its nature. In the mythologies of Saturn, Saturn walks with a cane. He has a limp, a permanent limp in his leg. In the Vedic stories, this limp is due to his rejection by his own father, Surya. So Shani was rejected by his own father, the sun. And part of this rejection was that the sun threw him as far as he could to the outer part of the solar system, hence the last planet in the solar system as a visible planet, hence making it the slowest planet to orbit around the sun. It always has a long journey to do one full revolution around the sun. And that throwing of him, that's what caused his leg injury. And Saturn's also old. He represents the elderly. And naturally, when we human beings get older, we become slower. So Saturn is very slow in everything that it does. It's distant, it's cold, it's detached. So being slow is one of Saturn's core significations. So one of the things that Saturn will always do in every sign, and Pisces is not exempt from it, it slowed us down in themes that are related to Pisces. And one of the ways that Saturn generally slows us down is to create uncertainty. Because think about it, when you're certain, you can make a decision just like that. Like in a split second, you know what to do, how to behave, how to be, where to go. When you're uncertain, that's when there are delays that come about. And delay is a signification of Saturn. So when we feel uncertain, we can't plan long term. The best that we can do is to go through life 1 hour at a time, 1 day at a time, one circumstance at a time, cautiously, carefully, with a lot of fear. And again, these are all significations of Saturn. Like for some of us, things got so bad, so much scarcity, again, Saturn, that we didn't know where the next meal would come from, how we pay the next rent, the next bill, how to cope with the next outburst from a partner, who might leave us, how to plan and proceed regarding our projects. There was so much uncertainty and fear, so much scarcity that came with it. And if you think about it, if you reflect back, so much of this was created because of lack of resources, lack of time, lack of energy. Saturn was making us do this alone. That's why I was saying at the beginning, Saturn wanted to separate us from the herd. Can you stand on your own? And in the sign of Pisces, we have this merged state where everything's together as a sense of oneness. And Saturn in this process was kind of like plucking you out of the oneness, making you feel very small and very alone. And in Pisces, that confrontation that we were constantly having with life, with our life circumstances, it wasn't like a overt confrontation. It was coming through the slow erosion of the way that we're connected to our lives. Like many of us saw that it was so hard for us to sustain our plans. Our certainty was constantly dissolving, and with it, our motivation was eroding. Our ties were loosening up, so we didn't feel like we had a support system. There were certain aspects of our lives that just couldn't hold us anymore. We couldn't belong in there. And there's a funny thing that was happening because these are significations of Saturn. While we're being slowed down, while resources were being taken away, we had to become even more responsible to hold on to what was left, to become more accountable. Like we were expected to show up through absolute exhaustion. And half the time, we didn't even know what we're showing up for. Like, what is this redundant thing that I'm showing up for? What is the meaning and the purpose of this? This is the brutality of Saturn. And you got to remember, Pisces is like this vast ocean. Saturn represents darkness. It's like being lost at the sea, middle of the night. It felt like we keep showing up in the dark. And so much of our feedback comes through the worlds that we have surrounded ourselves with. And because Saturn was keep dissolving our surrounding, we lacked feedback, our usual feedback to know what our stance is, how we belong in our worlds, where we're at. Are we getting better or are we getting worse? So we didn't have direct confirmation. It was hard to know, hard to have a clear sense of where our effort was taking us. Again, this is one of the reasons why this was such an exhausting period for so many for the past 2.5 years. And going back to that uncertainty, that was another point of burnout. Because sometimes you're going through a stretch of hell, but you understand why you're there and it's very bearable. You're like, that's fine, that's okay. I'll walk through this hell because I know I'm getting out. But that uncertainty of not knowing that if you can't get out, that in itself creates so much psychological exhaustion. For us human beings, we tend to burn out when we constantly put in effort, but we can't measure our progress. It becomes hard for us to know what matters and what doesn't. We are these meaning-making machines and we're so reliant on it. So when that gets muddied up, the entire nervous system gathers itself to shut you down, to preserve the energy. But at the same time, we all have that instinct to survive. And that's what was keep making us show up every day. So we kept pushing the boulder slowly with a lot of caution, very fearful, but we kept walking. That's why we're here today. And the hardest part of everything that's happened from 2023 to now, it was in our inability to see the end point. I know everything that I said so far, Saturn represents this kind of torment, which feels like an affliction. And a lot of this comes from the fact that Saturn does not teach its lessons through reassurance. He himself was forsaken by his father. We want approval the most from our parents. Symbolically, in its symbolic narrative, he did not receive this, so he does not know how to give it. Saturn teaches us through a kind of an exposure by throwing us into hell. And in that way, in reality, Saturn's toughening us up. And it's really like a dysfunctional father who wants to discipline you, but not through softness, not through telling you you've done so well, keep going. But it wants to do it through negation. Saturn represents negativity, like the minus sign. It constantly wants to take things away from your life. It's the principle of deduction. So it's keep telling you about what you can't do, what you don't have, where you can't go. It uses harsh, brutal components to show us what reality is really like. And if we really understand what reality is really like, we have no choice but to have a thicker skin, to become more rough around the edges. Like this spiritual woo-woo of don't mess up my positive vibe, it's completely out of touch with reality. Harshness and brutality is part of reality. If in doubt, think about the fact that you live and then you must die. And I don't care how hard we work, at the end, We don't get to see a complete story. There's no certainty. There's no imprinted time about our expiration. There's a lot of cruelty in this life. That's reality. Saturn teaches it harshly. But Saturn always has an aim. Nothing in existence is an accident. Saturn wanted to dissolve the things that no longer belonged in our life. That was the purpose of Saturn in Pisces. And through the brutality of Saturn, we ourselves came to see reality, things and people that no longer belong in our life. How we do not have to follow a certain herd. We do not have to belong to another herd. That we can stand on our own, that we can bear the pain, that we can do with less and will still survive. We saw the dysfunctionality of people, routines, things that we're attached to. Like Saturn took away many things that we depended on in the past 2.5 years. For instance, if your identity was dependent on getting recognition and validation so you would have a sense of self, Saturn took it away. Now, in the moment that is happening, brutal. But in hindsight, when you talk about what life and reality is about, you are strong. You are powerful if you can stand on your own and not get the validation and acknowledgement and continue and still have meaning. So this was the gift that Saturn was bestowing, but in the most brutal way. Like Saturn, if you had expectations of other people that they should have behaved in some way, they should have delivered something, Saturn was going to make sure that we feel the disappointment of that. And that's because there was that expectation, that dependency there. Saturn was dissolving those things. It was trying to get us to see the core of our being, the potential that we are. Saturn took away everything that will reinforce our sense of helplessness in the world. And it did this by making us feel helpless often in the past 2.5 years. Because those are the moments when you're sitting with your head between your knees, when you feel like you can't take another step, that you understand that you have to help yourself. That is a powerful moment, as brutal as it is. To know that you have been betrayed, that you are disappointed, you're exhausted, you're hurting, and that you can still take one more step, that is powerful. And all of them were coming about slowly, but accumulating. So it was a slow realization, understanding, hey man, I just can't carry certain things for another 50 years of my life. And yes, Saturn made us feel like we were drowning in that Pisces ocean. But many of us have learned how to swim. That's why this moment is worth reflecting on. Because that pain is still lingering, that fatigue is still lingering, and we might not have realized the kind of power that's been given back to us. And it's worth reflecting on because when Saturn stepped into Pisces, we were not a willing participant in this. But if you think back, in so many ways, you became a willing participant. In so many instances, you stood up to your fears. You have relinquished things that you thought you would die without it, and you're living. These are the points worth remembering now. Like today, where you stand, where you're sitting, there's so much understanding about the things that you should sustain and the things that you should just take your hands off of it and just let the waters of time take it away from you. Let them drift away. It's fine. And yeah, Saturn didn't allow us to see what all of these losses were for when they were happening. And Saturn sure the hell did not promise us that if you let this go, something better will come your way. All that it did through this 2.5 years was it's telling us keep living with less. Do more with less. See how you can do with less. And that was a super hard lesson to learn. And now it's worth reflecting what it is, how resourceful that we've become, what it is that we don't actually need anymore. And we can actually still do that act. We can still show up in the world as we are. We don't need all the bells and whistles. And if we sit and think, what is remaining now are the things that are absolutely fundamental to our life. We've learned how to carry things that matter to us. And that's a lesson that is very powerful in life. You know, it's like the idiot that thinks that they can put the entire world in their backpack and just go around the globe. They will exhaust themselves. But that packer who knows how to just pack what is absolutely necessary, they'll circle around the world twice. Saturn showed us there's some stuff that you're carrying that you just need to put it down. Let it go. Saturn taught us how to tolerate uncertainty. We've been conditioned. 2.5 years is a long time to walk with uncertainty. Your nervous system is now wired to know how to keep on moving through uncertainty. We learn how to tolerate impermanence, to out-survive losses, to tolerate solitude, being alone, to tolerate not knowing. These are not small tasks. These are the things that shuts down people's nervous system right away if they don't have proper conditioning in life. Just to give you an example, people always think sports, athletes, competition has to do with Mars. And yes, Mars is telling you about the action of it. But what is conditioning the athlete to become so enduring, so strong, to be able to show up under every mood, every life circumstance is Saturn. It's Saturn's endurance. And what happens is, why do athletes go to practice? They need to go to practice to overcome hardship after hardship to be able to push their limit. That's what's making them better. And that's what Saturn was doing. It was like a boot camp for us to strengthen our nervous system in that way. And that's why I was praising those who were separated from the herd but didn't look for another herd. They stood on their own 2 feet. They faced it. And what you got now is an iron nervous system. It's going to take a lot to take you down in Aries, and we're going to be tested in Aries. And if you think about it, we're taught at the beginning of life that we can just have a happy life, as if it's some external condition that will find us and our boat will never be rocked again. This is untrue. And I don't care who you are, what your social position is, your economic status is. Life is harsh and brutal. Reality applies to all. No one's exempt from it. So the best thing that can happen to us in life is to understand how to deal with reality, not to wish for something other than reality. And Saturn, for many of us, brought this through all the losses that it caused and made us understand what it means to be in reality and to deal with it. That's a gift. Saturn, for those of us who were able to endure, has brought us unparalleled endurance. Think about, reflect back at the things that you had to endure, the betrayals, the losses, the scarcity, the uncertainty, the fear. You've gone through the worst of it and you still stand. It's shown us what's very durable, indestructible within us. And it's also worth remembering, after everything that Saturn has dissolved, we got to give credit where credit's due. Who's still standing beside you? Which relationships lasted? Who fought for you? Who did you still show up and fight for? Friends that didn't leave your side. These were part of the foundation of your life that were so strong that even reality, Saturn, could not touch it. It's worth reflecting back on that and to see what kept sustaining itself and kept staying despite everything that happened. These are the things we now need to take into the future with a sense of reverence, respect, and honor it. And as soon as Saturn crosses into Aries, whether we want to take this next 2 weeks and reflect or not, Saturn's right away somehow is going to show us what our capacity level is. And those of us who have learned, we now know what our limits are. And because of that, we also know what's worth keeping, what's worth fighting for. And because of Saturn in Pisces, when it's in Aries and is dishing out that first lesson, by understanding our limitation, we'll also know our possibilities and where our horizon is. And that matters in Aries because you have to know your trajectory of action. You have to understand why you're making that decision, why you're being propelled to move that way. Like if we've learned our lesson, when in the sign of Aries, where we constantly have to ignite, we'll know what we can just let it rest and what it is that we need to carry with us to sustain us. We'll know who and what drains us beyond repair and that we don't have that luxury in the sign of Aries. So we won't have those interactions while in the sign of Aries. We've learned what it is that makes us collapse. This is what I know. This is what I'm saying about limitations, knowing our limitation. It's arrogant to think that we can withstand every condition. Some of our nervous system, our psychology, the way that we've been wired is not made to be in certain conditions. That's our limitation. And to actually know that in the sign of Aries, well, no, I'm not going to act towards that thing. I'm not going to show a reaction. I am not going to respond because I know what that does to me. And I don't have the luxury of doing this while Saturn's in the sign of Aries and it's debilitated. And Saturn creates a lot of false ignition. So we need that wisdom to know when to act and when to refrain. Be silent, be solitary, and let the moment pass. And we now know we can sit in the darkness all alone with very limited resources, and we can survive. So that's okay if that happens again in the sign of Aries. And in the sign of Aries, everything moves quick. So it's going to come and go. We can deal with that. Saturn is going to continue doing Saturn things in Aries. It's going to constantly send us signals of what it is that you cannot do. But for those of us who have learned, we also now know what it is that we can do. And that's why this moment of reflection matters again. We have built resiliency in the past 2.5 years because of so many losses. So we know we can go without and we won't die. And as I was saying before, to think that there's a new day and a new start is one of the greatest farce of, I don't know, the things that we've been told. It's a lie. And the proof is in the pudding, because when Saturn goes to the next sign, Saturn just doesn't end its Saturnine lessons and begin with a new arbitrary lesson. Saturn carries the result of the previous sign into the next sign, sequentially. There's telling a story and a narrative. If in doubt, go back to year 1 of life where Saturn's sitting in your birth chart, watch its transit. The stories have had follow through, lesson by lesson, to where you've arrived today. And since Saturn's going into the sign of Aries, a sign that has everything to do with initiation and starting something, igniting. So a sign that's related to our actions. We'll see Saturn's lessons are all related to the sign of Pisces and what we've learned. What are we acting towards now? Who are we fighting for? What are we fighting for? Who are we trying to connect ourselves to? Do I have the power of discernment, that fire element that gives light, the power of seeing in the sign of Aries? Do I now have the ability to see what actually slows me down in life? Did I learn that? Did I learn that I can do without it in the sign of Pisces? Have I learned how to pause, how to be okay in silence for a moment in the fast moving environment of Aries? There are very few people who have the capacity to do that. But if we've learned our lesson in Pisces through that long duration of it, we can most certainly condense it, concentrate it, and do short spurts of it. Maybe more frequently, but just spurts of it. And you know, if you have Mars and Saturn conjunct together in your chart, and if you have learned the lessons of this conjunction, you are far more stronger than most people. And this is Saturn now in Mars' sign. So Saturn wants to teach us something about strength. Saturn wants to show us what it means to have precision with our will, to be objective. It wants to see, are we able to have a relentless application of the will? Can our will endure certain things, what we're willing to endure? And with all the scarcity that we experience, we'll know how to dig deep to our own internal furnace, again, if we've learned the lessons. And you know, through this journey of Saturn and Pisces, we know what's worthy of a fight now. We know how to evaluate cost benefit. And that's because we now know what it feels like to be in this battle of endless effort. We know how painful sustained responsibility is and what it takes. So in the sign of Aries, we're going to take it seriously, what we act towards. If we've learned our lesson, we're going to be like, is this worth it? And Saturn is a serious planet and it's coming into a sign of action. So it's demanding serious action, serious contemplation of, do you want this responsibility, this undertaking, the effort, the exertion of energy? And if we've learned our lesson, we know what's worthy of our efforts. Now we know we're not to waste our energy, not to have it just leak and seep out, because we now know what it's like to feel fatigued, drained. If we've learned, we won't choose battles or initiate things that we can't stand behind it. And we certainly will not just move with the noise of the world to escape discomfort, especially the discomfort of just being alone, being silent. And in the sign of Aries, you really have to know how to do things alone. It's a very individualistic sign. It is a pioneering sign. That means it does not follow the herd. It moves to the sound of its own drumbeat. So that's going to be accentuated when Saturn goes into Aries. And if we have learned certain things in Pisces, we can handle this. We got this. And you know, there's a thing with Saturn. You know, sometimes you watch athletes like basketball players, they make a shot and then they stand there in that pose because they're celebrating their shot. Saturn doesn't like that. So Saturn's saying right now, reflect, but Don't celebrate your survival. Not yet. Saturn saying, I want you to actually take this moment to recognize what your endurance has shaped inside of you, how the shape of you, your internal landscape has completely changed. Understand its pathways. And it's this recognition that will allow us to act cleanly and with clarity in the sign of Aries, and to do it without panic, without fantasy, and without unnecessary force, which is hard to do in the sign of Aries. If you go in there with arrogance, if you go there feeling pompous, over-motivated, over-determined, overconfident. So we gotta actually enter the sign of Aries in a bit of a humble state of mind, especially since Saturn's the one who's taking us into the sign of Aries. And before closing this video, please do remember to subscribe, like, and share, especially comments. I'd love to know how things have been unfolding for you since 2023. And most importantly, in this moment, how are you planning to reflect? What do you think has changed? What's the significance of that? I think sharing that with each other is also very helpful because it helps us to understand what are these significant themes that have come up in different lives. So leave your comments. I'd love to know about them. And if you want to understand the transits in your own birth chart, this one or other transits, or to just understand the blueprint of your life, you can go to the description box below or to parisayazdi.com for more information. And I've been uploading new articles related to the videos as they come out. So you can also check that out on the website. And now to close this video, I just want us to remember that this is not a moment about rising up, that new day concept that I was talking about. It's just about standing differently, and standing differently because they've come through lessons learned, and learning that effort has a cost, in the ways that you've learned how to deal with uncertainty, in the ways that you've learned how to remain even though meaning was delayed, and even when meaning did not even exist. We stand differently today than we did in 2022 and before that. And that self-knowledge of how we've changed and what we learned is very important. And it's also important because it's that self-knowledge that will allow us to know what we should initiate and how it is that we should act or can act in the sign of Aries. And you know, Saturn never asks for drama. Going back to the beginning of the video, there's a sense of coldness, detachment, and objectivity with Saturn. So there's no drama, but it does ask for responsibility. And in the sign of Aries, one of the responsibilities that we have is to understand our Dharma, because this is a sign related to Dharma because of its fire elements. Saturn wants to know what we're made of. And when we know what we're made of, we know what is absolutely necessary in our lives. We know what is worth our efforts. We know what is worth our fight. We know where we contribute to the world and we're not just adding to the noise of it. Saturn wants us to understand this now in the sign of Aries. And of course, Saturn is a planet of time and it's very much related to karma. So when we don't live in accordance to our Dharma, which are the actions that we're supposed to perform based on our nature in the sign of Aries, Saturn's going to be dishing out brutal karma. And there's so much more about Saturn at that 29-degree mark, that Gandanta point, the karmic knot. And I talk about that extensively in another video, which is about the station of Saturn. I'll put the link to that video in the description box below. I know some of you watch the videos as they come out. I don't want to take up your time and repeat those ideas. So I'll just link that video below and you guys can go check it out if you want to understand what it is, this transition of Saturn from water to fire. What is this karmic knot? What does it feel like? What does it translate to? It's all in that video. And to conclude this video, I like to leave us with a wish. And I say, may we recognize what we've learned about endurance, about what we can now carry, about what we no longer need to. And as Saturn moves into the sign of Aries, may our actions come from that understanding, not from the urgency of Aries, not from fear, but from clarity, the clarity that we have earned by experience with Saturn in the sign of Pisces. That's it for today. Sending you much love. Till next time.